Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. In the last few months, the world may have taken a giant step toward the kind of surveillance that will be necessary for the mark of the beast. Refugees have been the excuse. Forbes magazine reported that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, has made the decision to use biometrics to track refugees displaced by war. Biometrics are big in the movies, but they are also very real. Biometrics are certain measurable physical traits unique to each individual. They include things like fingerprints and palm prints. Also, the shape of the ear and other facial features. Biometrics include the configuration of the iris and the eyeball. Also, 3D modeling of the blood vessels in the hands and fingers. With today's computers, each of these identifiers can be used with great accuracy. Some of them can be utilized in almost real time. Stephen Corliss is the Program and Management Support Director of the United Nations Refugee Agency. He explained that refugees depend on physical papers to prove their identification and give background information. But they leave home in such a hurry that they often leave their papers behind, or they lose their papers along the way, and officials at various checkpoints simply take their papers, then never return them to the refugee. Corliss said, the biometric identity management system uses advanced technology to secure and preserve the identity of the refugees from the time they register with UNHCR until they find a solution by returning home, integrating in the country where they have found protection, or resettling in a new country. They say the tracking ends when the refugee has found protection or resettled in a new country. But don't you believe it? A complete personal profile takes only a small amount of computer memory. So keeping data makes sense as a simple matter of efficiency. Biometric identification data works best when it is prepared in advance. No one knows when or where the next refugee crisis might occur. That means they need to prepare for it by assembling a biometric data dossier on every human being on the planet. It's beginning to sound a little more prophetic, isn't it? The UN claims that it will not share the data with third parties or national governments, but that is the emptiest of promises. Once they have the data, they will do with it what they want. And in the long run, the UN may represent a bigger threat to liberty and privacy than any nation or third parties. The refugee crisis marks the beginning of this mass invasion of privacy. Fear of terrorism will push it along. More and more security officials feel they need to keep track of everyone. They want to know where everyone is located, the things that everyone buys, and who each person associates with. These are exactly the things the Antichrist will want to know. The United Nations is not alone in this effort. The World Bank is working along the same lines. On September 28, the World Bank released a report on how it is helping third world nations develop universal ID management systems. The document begins, official identification is more than convenience. It is a fundamental human right. Doing this under the guise of human rights is amazing. 2 billion people in the world currently have no official ID. Like Caesar Augustus in the days of Jesus Christ, world leaders today know that to get everyone under their control and to be able to tax everyone, you need a detailed census. And today's leaders can do what Caesar never imagined. With biometrics, they can create the census, then electronically keep tabs on every individual. On this program, I recently discussed the UN's 2030 agenda. It's a list of 17 goals adopted unanimously by the United Nations General Assembly. But Section 16.9 is quite definite. It says, by 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. I don't know what the mark of the beast will be, but I have said for years that it would work in conjunction with something like fingerprints, palm prints, or by iris recognition. In recent years, facial recognition has become widespread and efficient. They are even developing a system of examining the blood vessels in the hand or fingers. It's no accident that almost everything on the list of biometrics identifiers is on or near the face or hand. The Bible says that the mark of the beast itself will be on the face, forehead, with some people, and the hand with others. Revelation chapter 14, verses 9 and 10 says, and another angel, a third one, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or upon his hand, he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. The mark of the beast isn't just a puzzle to be solved or an intellectual exercise. The wine of the wrath of God, mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, is deadly serious. The Antichrist world economic system will be built around the mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 13, verse 17 says, he provides that no one should be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. The mark of the beast will be more than an ID, so don't worry that you're already in the system. Those who receive the mark will choose to do so, and the Bible describes that choice as an act of worship. Don't expect a decree tomorrow telling you to go to the local courthouse and to receive a mark in order to continue to buy and sell. But after the rapture of the church, after God has taken his people out of here, after the salt or preserving agent of the earth is removed, then this thing will be put into motion at light speed. It's all being set up right now. As I prepared for this week's program, I was again struck by the speed with which events are moving into the scenario the prophets predicted for the end times. I believe we're there. People on the street are talking about what all of these things mean. Folks that wouldn't darken the door of a church or pick up a Bible are now very curious. This may be our greatest opportunity, maybe even our last opportunity, to share the gospel of Jesus Christ before we're silenced by political correctness. The message that God has given me is more important now than it's ever been, for the church and for the nation. That's why I'm asking you to help me to expand our reach.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.
And thanks for being a vital part of my team. Jesus said of the last days, because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. He was referring to lawlessness on two levels. First, to the individuals who flaunt the constraints of rules, especially God's rules, and then that of the whole societies. If you look at the United States over the last 40 years, one piece of good news stands out. The rate of violent crime has fallen significantly over the last few decades. In 1980, there were 10.2 homicides for every 100,000 people. By 2013, that had gone down to 4.5, less than half. That's a dramatic drop by any standard. Did people suddenly become nicer or what? In 2004, the New York Times ran the headline, "Despite drop in crime, an increase in inmates." They wanted to know how there could be an increase in inmates even as violent crime went down. But the answer was obvious. Violent crime was down because more criminals were locked away. By 2013, the U.S. incarceration rate was 716 per 100,000 population, an extremely high figure. America houses 22% the world's prisoners. The high incarceration rate came in response to a high crime rate. Some proponents of weakening the drug laws blame the large prison population on marijuana laws. They've given the public the idea that most of the people locked up were caught by having a small amount of marijuana. That's not true. According to statistics readily available from the U.S. Justice Department, most of the people in the U.S. prisons are there because they were convicted of violent crimes, primarily murder, manslaughter, aggravated assault, robbery, and rape. Most are not there because of any kind of drug offense. Over the last few years, the United States has been actively trying to lower the prison population. At this very moment, the federal government is in the midst of its largest ever prisoner release, 6,000 inmates released over just a few days. The federal government and most states have been systematically reducing prison populations all over the country. The results were predictable. As prison populations have been going down, violent crime has been climbing back up. Just this year, the murder rate in Milwaukee has risen 76%. In St. Louis, it's up 60%. In Baltimore, 56%. In Washington, D.C., 44%. It's the same story in many big cities. Lawlessness decreased when the lawless were locked up, but lawlessness in 2015 is headed back up with a vengeance. In the effort to reduce the prison population, the U.S. is doing something else that promotes yet another kind of lawlessness. The Justice Department has chosen not to prosecute certain crimes. Believe it or not, selling marijuana is illegal in every state of the Union, period. I know what you're thinking, but what about Colorado? What about other states where the drug has been declared legal for recreational purposes? Alaska, Oregon, and Washington. What about the 23 states where so-called medical marijuana is legal? The Federal Controlled Substance Act makes selling marijuana illegal in the entire United States. In 2013, the DOJ sent a memo to all federal prosecutors with the subject line, "Guidance regarding marijuana enforcement." The memo says, Congress has determined that marijuana is a dangerous drug and that the illegal distribution and sale of marijuana is a serious crime. The Department of Justice is committed to enforcing the Controlled Substance Act consistent with these determinations. But then the DOJ talks about using limited investigative and prosecutorial resources to address the most significant threats. It then lists those threats, but never mentions the sale of marijuana. In essence, the Department of Justice is telling us prosecutors that selling marijuana is against the law, but don't enforce that law. The Constitution mandates that the President takes care that the laws be faithfully executed. In the area of criminal law, a president does that through his Department of Justice, but the current president refused to prosecute those laws that he and his political constituents don't like. In the long run, that's even worse than the rising murder rate. When those charged with keeping the law choose to ignore the parts that they don't like, that is lawlessness on the institutional level.
Thank you so much for standing with me as a watchman on the wall. I thank God for sending me such loyal partners, and I pray daily that He will reward your faithfulness and protect and prosper you in these very difficult times. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart.
Prosecutors and police have always had some discretion in the enforcement of certain laws. Perhaps a policeman pulls you over for speeding. You give a reasonable explanation for why you're speeding, and he decides to let you off with a warning. It's important for law enforcement to have a degree of latitude because they face situations the law did not anticipate. But what if a mayor instructed an entire police force to stop enforcing laws against certain crimes because the mayor happened to dislike the politics of those laws? Or what happens if the mayor says to the police that they are not allowed to give tickets to his friends? What if a president does that? Last week, House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz submitted a resolution to impeach IRS Commissioner John Koskinen. The new impeachment resolution says Commissioner Koskinen violated the public trust. He failed to comply with a congressional-issued subpoena. Documents were destroyed on his watch, and the public was consistently misled. On March 4, 2014, Internal Revenue Service employees in Martinsburg, West Virginia, magnetically erased 422 backup tapes, destroying as many as 24,000 of Lois Lerner's emails responsive to the subpoena. The allegations go on for 60 pages. Even if the House votes to impeach, it's difficult to imagine the Senate voting to convict the commissioner. When a society gives such extraordinary power to an agency or individual, it must also demand extraordinary accountability. When the IRS seems to have exploited its power for political purposes, the fact must never be pushed under the rug. They must see the light of day. The nation has been in an uproar recently about a deputy serving as high school resource officer in South Carolina. A girl was disrupting class while on her cell phone. Her teacher asked her to put the phone away. She refused. A school administrator was brought in to help. Still, the girl refused to put away her phone or to leave the classroom. Not knowing what else to do, the educators called in Police Deputy Ben Fields, who was assigned to that school. It became his job to get her to the principal's office. She refused to get up. So what was he supposed to do? If she would not move, his only choice was to physically put his hands on her and make her move. She hung onto the chair. She struck him. The chair fell over backwards in the struggle. She kept hanging on to the chair, and finally, he extracted her and slid her across the room. There was no body slam, as some in the media have claimed. Watch the video. But Deputy Fields has been fired. The student is unharmed. In its outrage over the deputy's actions, America has missed a really important question. What is going on with our young people? Why did they think they can get away with refusing lawful orders from police officers? In too many cases, the answer is simply that they can get away with it. The community should have the officers back, but instead, it throws him to the wolves. It's a tough time to be a police officer in America. The media keep asking why a deputy would throw a girl across the room when the only thing she did wrong was talk on a phone. But that's ridiculous. He did not throw her across the room, and all she had to do was put the phone away as her teacher and the administrator asked, and the deputy would never have been called. All she had to do when he got there was go with him to the principal's office. But several young men over the last couple of years have been killed when all they had to do was drop the gun or the knife. The media and politicians are teaching a generation of young men and women that they are heroic if they mouth off to teachers and other authority figures. They are training them to refuse a law officer's commands. And our communities, instead of backing up the police, are condemning them as murderers. That's how popular filmmaker Quentin Tarantino describes them. Our land is increasingly one of lawlessness, and as long as the police are considered the enemy, it will only get worse. But we should not be surprised. These are the last days. Jesus told us long ago that in the last days, lawlessness will abound. In this period of lawlessness, we need a special kind of faith, a faith that will endure and set us apart for the Lord's coming. In Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 26, I'm going to read a kind of faith that we need to improvise and come with. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, and that word grown up can mean become great also. And I'm going to read it that way. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment of the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. It's very important to follow the grammar of this passage because it's key to understanding it. The action of the main verb comes after the action of the participles. There are two participles that are prominent here: choosing and considering. And it must come before he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, which is the main verb. You see, Moses had become great. He was at the pinnacle of his power. He had built a city. He had went to war with the Ethiopians that they didn't invade Egypt for a decade, for several decades. And he was known as a man of war, a man of politics, a man that could speak well, and he was known as a master at building buildings. And he was excellent. He had the whole world at his fingertips, because in that time, Egypt was worthy of the world's power. They had all kinds of things for people to enjoy themselves with. And Moses was at that pinnacle where he could have had anything. He was like a god. He could walk by and people would cry his name, Moses, Moses. He was truly like a god. And yet, we read in these verses the key to Moses' faith. He chose rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Now, he chose to do that. That was before he turned down being the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And considering, this is a word that means carefully considering things, thinking it over and carefully considering whether it's worthwhile. He considered the reproach of Christ, the Messiah, greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. And no nation had treasures like Egypt did. But he chose to follow Christ, and he chose the riches that were to come rather than the treasures of Egypt. He could have rationalized around and said, oh, well, I can still, from my pinnacle, do good for Israel, and I can still, in that place, abandon my time with other things and be Israel's guide. But no, he didn't rationalize it. He chose to have the reproach of Christ and consider greater riches than the riches of Egypt, which were enormous. Now that's the kind of faith that God wants us to have. We're headed for a time of real lawlessness, a time of people spitting on us, a time when they're going to consider Christianity a very poor religion at the best. We need to believe in the treasures of Christ to come. We need to believe in the simplicity of believing in Jesus Christ and having a makeup that is ready to choose Christ at any moment that we have to. I pray that you will have a faith like that, and that you will choose to receive all of the things that the Bible tells us, and to endure the things that we have to enjoy them, but they will certainly come. God help you in having your best faith in view at this time when faith is absolutely necessary. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.